All right, we are back and we are going to continue with chapter 2. I have been running around the clinic like a mad lady trying to get everything in place, and so I'm feeling rather disheveled at this point, but I think I can speak about language development. When we stopped, we had been talking about the nativist and the behaviorist and about language development and the two different theories. The nativists believed that children learn language with their genetics that they're born with, that they have this reservoir that's full of language and it just has to be tapped into. The behaviorists, on the other hand, say, no, the kids don't have anything. Children don't have anything. They say that the, the slate is clean and that they're going to learn through imitation. We were working on or talking about the nativists, and let me kind of back up just a little bit, and then we'll get into that language acquisition device. And I believe that's where we maybe did some stopping, or the transformational grammar. Chomsky is aligned with transformational grammar, and Chomsky says that you have an infinite number of sentences that you can produce. Now, if you think back to Hackett, we talked about that with Hackett. Hackett said the same thing. That's what makes us unique. That's what makes us different than other species. And the transformational grammar, not everybody agrees with it, and you'll find that out with any theory and with research. One person says, well, I might buy into this, but I don't buy into this. And the transformational grammar is you take a thought, an idea, an image, and that's the deep structure. Then you apply the rules, the words and how you put them together, and then you bring it to the surface, and then you generate the sentence. And that's what Chomsky was known for, was transformational generative grammar. Now, with his language acquisition device, he says that the syntactic information, or the grammar, provided by the child's models, and this is what generates that grammar in the child's native language. But that you know that this reservoir is full and these kids are primed and ready to communicate. The nativists also believed that if language was purely learned, we would be more conscious of what we're saying. We would be more conscious of our sentence structure. We would maybe even produce more complicated sentence structures. Our vocabulary may be more professional. We may be more articulate, just in general. And so the nativists believe that if language were purely learned, as the behaviorists think, that we would have more of a conscious understanding of what we're doing to create sentences at this deep level as we move to the surface. If you want to look at that, it's on page 36, table 2.2 in your textbook. Now, the behaviorists say, well, we have to have observable behaviors. It's not something that humans have. It's not what we have. It's what we do that we can observe. They're not talking about memory. They're not talking about attention. They're talking about the emphasis being on observable behavior. Skinner is aligned with the behaviorist, and he says that children learn language by imitation, reinforcement, and successive approximations. And I happen to believe that. I think that's why children learn cuss words. They've heard them, and they've heard them used with expression, and they've also been reinforced to say those words if somebody laughed at them or even if somebody scolded them. They know that they can push mom's buttons or dad's buttons because they get a reaction out of them. Behaviorists say that the environment is the most critical, not genetics, it's the environment. Now, they will admit that there's a little bit of a genetic component that is important, but the environment is by far the most crucial. Skinner says that language is learned because of operant conditioning principles. Now, I know that you've learned about operant conditioning in other classes, or I am assuming that you have. And operant behavior is any behavior whose frequency can be affected by the response that follows it. So if you want to reinforce the target behavior, you want to increase the consequence of that response. If you want to decrease, then the target behavior has to be punished. Now, punished to me is kind of a harsh word, and it means something more significant or more severe than just ignoring a behavior, but it isn't anything that is physically invasive at all for a child. And behavior is learned basically on these principles. Now, I do know that in a classroom setting, you have maybe 26 children, and those children are all needy. They all have something that they want you to do for them. And you're going to ask a question in a classroom, and you want the children to raise their hand if they know the answer. That's basically a rule in a classroom. It's a pragmatic social rule in a classroom. So you're the teacher, and you say, okay, I'm going to ask you a question. If you know the answer, raise your hand. So here comes the question, and Johnny's sitting over here, and he doesn't raise his hand, but he blurts out the answer. But the teacher is looking over here, and she notices that little Betty Sue over here is raising her hand. So she answers, oh, Betty, I like the way you're raising your hand, you little Betty Sue. You are just the cutest thing, and you just make me so happy when you raise your hand. So she's reinforcing the hand raising. Teacher asks question number 2. She says, if you know the answer to the question, raise your hand. And again, little Johnny over here blurts out the answer, but she sees Billy Bob in the back. And Billy Bob has his hand up. And she says, Billy Bob, what's the answer? And he answers the question, and she says, you're right. Oh, thank you so much for raising your hand. You're following the directions, and I am so happy. It makes me so happy that you listen to what I say. Okay, here comes question number 3. She says, I'm going to ask you a question. If you know the answer, raise your hand. And Johnny's hand goes up. And she immediately looks over at Johnny and says, Johnny, you raised your hand. I'm so happy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You are just the best. I love it when you raise your hand. It makes me so happy. You're such a big boy. You're following directions. And she's laying it on because she wants to reinforce the behavior of hand raising. Now, she may go through the rest of the class, and maybe she has 5 more questions, and Johnny may still blurt out an answer, but he may also raise his hand. And so reinforcing the behavior that you want hopefully will increase that behavior. And ignoring the behavior that you don't want hopefully will decrease that behavior that you don't want. You have to be consistent with it. If you say you're going to do something, you'd better do it. If you don't, and you're inconsistent with your follow through, you're going to confuse those kiddos and you're going to have a great deal of difficulty changing the behavior. So be very careful with that. Sometimes we have to shape the behavior that we want with chaining, little successive steps along the way. If I have a child who I'm working with and this child has a language delay, I don't really want to talk baby talk with that child. I don't want to say, was trying to think if baba for bottle, especially if this child is 2 years old, we blanky. We want to keep the language more age appropriate. But this child is language delayed, and I'm working with the child, and I have water, and I'm going to take a drink of my water. Oh, and I say that water, and the baby or the child says wah wah, and I go, oh, yeah, you said water. Now I acknowledge that wah wah is water, but I modeled it correctly. And then we go along, and the child says wah wah a few more times. Maybe a week later, I'm getting wada. Wow, you said water. Good talking, yay! And then maybe 2 weeks later, we're getting water, water. And then you see how you're shaping that wah wah into water through chaining. Skinner argues that verbal behaviors serve one of 5 specific functions defined according to what they do. According to what they do. And the 5 are echoic. Oh boy, that was a strong echoic. I wanted to say okaic. Echoic, tact, manned, intraverbal, and autoclitic. Now, if you are working on a minor in ABA, applied behavior analysis, you may be familiar with this terminology. I do believe we'll have questions on the exam over these 5 terms, so it's something that you will want to become familiar with. And on page 43 in your textbook, table 2.1, you will find this information. So, echoic, defined as the imitation of a model when objects or ideas are present. I hold up a cup and I say cup, and you say cup. So I've said the word, you've imitated it. In the tact, it's defined as verbal behavior that associates the name with an object, action, or event. I'm just going to hold it up, and I'm not saying what it is, but you say cup. You recognize it as cup. So we've gone from imitation to spontaneity. So it's spontaneous speech. Manned is defined as verbal behavior used to request or demand. The child says, me want drink. The child may see your glass. The child may go into the kitchen and you're in there and me want drink, me want drink. So the child is actually requesting. Intraverbal is defined as social talk freely associated in situational contexts. So they're using language in a particular context. And in this situation that they have as the example, Daddy gets ready to go to work and he leaves the house and the child runs to the window and looks out and Mommy says, Daddy went to work. Yeah, Daddy went to work. And the child says, go outside and play now. The child has made the association of Daddy going to work and then being able to go outside and play. Autoclitic, defined as linking words into sentences based on observations and experiences. The child is outside playing and sees his big sister riding her bicycle, and he says, "Sissy riding bike." He is commenting on an action that he sees in the environment. Another variation of operant conditioning is classical conditioning, and I'm sure you're familiar with classical conditioning, and that is the example of Pavlov's dog. You're pairing or sequencing stimulus that elicit an unconditioned response. So we all know the bell, the dog sees the food, the dog salivates. So after several attempts of this, when the dog hears the bell, the dog will salivate. The interactionist theory is the one probably that most of us truly align with. I don't think any of us would say language is dependent only on genetics, or language is only dependent on the environment. I think most of us would say biology and environment are both crucial or important for language development. Supporting evidence shows that if children learn language activities, learned language structure, no, wait a minute. Nope, that's not what I want to say. No, okay. Children learn language over time, and they reach milestones. And you will see that there are developmental checklists. And these developmental checklists will indicate at the age of 1, 2, 3, and 4 what the child should be doing or should be able to do. And so it's over a period of time. By the time the child is 2, language and vocabulary has exploded. That's a given fact. But it does continue to grow and expand over time. But they learn it a little bit at a time. There is a direct connection between the amount of talking that a child is exposed to from their parents or their caregivers and the increase in academic performance at the age of 9. The more you talk to a child, the more academic success they have. You just have to talk to them. You're driving down the road and talk about the trees and what color they are. Talk about other cars passing your car. Big trucks, little cars, fast cars, slow cars. Some cars are parked. Cars have tires. Cars have horns. And you maybe see people going down the sidewalk, and a mommy and a daddy and a baby. You just talk about what you see. You can sing songs, The Wheels on the Bus, Old MacDonald Had a Farm, if you're driving through the countryside. The more you talk to a child, the better the academic performance. You can have the child in the high chair in the kitchen, and you're cooking. And you're talking about stirring. And you have a big spoon and a little spoon. And you put in milk and eggs and flour. And you have to turn the oven on, and it gets hot. And you have to blow because it's hot. You're just simply talking about what you're doing. No expensive toys and no fancy trips. The interactionist theory, of course, I've said is the one that we most align with. And but there are viewpoints within this interactionist view. And one of them is semantics. And I hope you all know what semantics means. It's dealing with the meaning of words or the intent of what's being said. There is a cognitive viewpoint and there is a social interactionist viewpoint. The semantic view focuses on the meaning that children convey through grammar. We shifted from the structure, transformational grammar. We shifted from structure to meaning. The semantic viewpoint argues that for a language to be truly generative, it must have meaning as well as structure. And I think that makes sense. I think the structure, we have certain rules that we still have to follow. And that structure, therefore, is important. But what is the intent of what we're trying to say? Now, there are two slides that I'm not going to cover. The first one starts out with Fillmore. This one I am not using. And this one I am not using. I've got my fan on, and that's why it's blowing the paper. This one I'm not using, and this one I'm not using. Now, Fillmore has another theory, talks about case grammar. He's not quite as popular as Chomsky, but he and Chomsky did share some important views, but I think it becomes very confusing the more theorists that we add to the overall theory of language. So I would prefer not to use those. Piaget's cognitive theory focuses on the sensory motor period, and that's from 0 to 2. And sensory motor is just what it says. Sensory, your senses, touch, you feel things, you smell things, you taste things, you hear things, you see things, you have motion. That's a sensory feeling when you're, let's say you're on a boat and you have that sensation of the water lapping up around the boat. You're on a swing. You're swinging back and forth. There's a sensation. That's a sensation, a sensory component. But Piaget is well known for this sensory motor period from birth to 2. And we know that period is very critical for speech and language development, those early years. The First Steps program in Indiana is from 0 to 3, and that early intervention is vital. We don't want to miss that window of opportunity for our kiddos. I think, realize you can't separate cognition from language. They run together, and all theories are looking at cognition and language. They accept that as an important feature between how our kiddos are learning language. The cognitive view also emerges as a product of cognitive organization and development. The brain matures. Cognitive plasticity, cognitive maturation. As the cognitive plasticity progresses, matures, language is making progress, and the child's language structures are maturing. Language and cognition run pretty parallel. They run together is what I mean by that. Some tests will give you a language score, and you know that's kind of a cognitive score too. So those two areas are very much intertwined. Imitation is an important part of the overall cognitive development. It stresses logical structure, And it just sort of makes sense that we're talking about people, places, and things. And we're using these people, places, and things for symbolic play. And symbolic play is a language structure. It's more abstract. The pretend play is more abstract. We learn a lot about children as they participate in symbolic play. We learn about what they see at home, what they hear at home. I had a child one time that was in a pretend play situation, and he picked up the phone and he said, "Hello, 911, I need help, I need help, send the police, send the police." Well, that child obviously has heard that for some reason. If you hear the child say, "You stop that and you go to the corner and you stay there right now until I tell you to move." Well, they've probably been told that. And so they're learning by imitation and the situations that are within the environment. There is an information processing theory that says we process information much like a computer. And we certainly do. We store information in different parts of the brain. If we have learned something and we have a similar piece of information that's new, we may store it in the same place. We have lots of different compartments and ways that we store information to remember it. I'm trying to decide where I want to cut off. Might cut off right there. The middle ground view is known as the social interactionist. It is, again, both biologically influenced by genetics and the environment. Some theorists are more into the nature, some are more into the behaviorists, but we still know the influence is very much from the important people in your life. If you think about social interactionists, what do you think of? Pragmatics. This is a child's way to interpret somebody's intent. The intent shapes his initial attempts to communicate. We reinforce that attempt to communicate, and we say something, the child says something back, and over time we've got this sophisticated communication that goes on between the two of us. It's our reaction to what the child is doing. The interactionists also talk about parents and caregivers. They believe that children are active participants in the language process, not passive as the behaviorists believe. Okay, I think we're going to stop with that one. Need to mark that, and we'll pick up here. We will probably be able to finish chapter 2, maybe even Friday. There is a possibility that we may be able to do that, or we may pick up, yeah, we'll be real close. We'll be real close to finishing that up. I am going to sometime maybe tomorrow or Friday, I will put on Canvas a YouTube video that I want you to watch about an upcoming topic that we have. Now, I'm not uploading that to Canvas for you to select. You go to YouTube and find Mother Eve's samples. And then there's one, how to talk How to Talk Parent Ease. It's by Funky Giraffe. By Funky Giraffe. How to Talk Parent Ease. Those are two videos that you go to YouTube and you can type in Mother Ease, Parent Ease, and then on the right side of my screen comes up some possible videos, and one says Mother Ease Samples and the other one says How to Talk Parent Ease, and it's Funky Giraffe. And I will put that on Canvas, but I'm not putting those videos on Canvas. You go to YouTube and search for those. Okay, this is my second time to try and put this video together. The first time it wouldn't accept it and it blacked out. So I'm hoping that now this one works. So we will finish chapter 2 probably on Friday. See ya.